Hello and welcome to another episode of Full Court Finance here at Zach's. I'm your host, Ben Rains, and this week there's a lot going on at sports. This past weekend was the Final Four, and then you have the National Championship game tonight, and Major League Baseball started last week on Thursday, and then this upcoming week is Masters Week, so this is three huge things in sports all happening pretty much at once, but I kind of want to just start with a little Final Four talk, and then a preview of tonight's game. So over this past weekend, you had number 3 Michigan playing number 11 Loyola. Loyola of Chicago was the big underdog story. Everyone knows at this point. Michigan was 5.5 point favorites. Loyola was up for a decent portion of the game, even though they were down big early, but then they ended up losing by 12. Pretty fun game. Then the next game on TBS was a blowout. It was number 1 Villanova over number 1 Kansas. Villanova was a 5-point favorite, but they ended up winning huge. Final was 95-79. It was never really even close. Villanova was just jacking up 3 after 3 after 3 and hitting all of them. So then you have tonight is the national championship, and that is on at 8:20 Central, so 9:20 Eastern time. Pretty late start for a lot of people, but one of the biggest games in college basketball, and you have Villanova favored by 6.5 points over Michigan. It should be a fun game. I don't really know at this point who I want to win, but I'm just rooting for a fun game. I don't want to see a 20-point blowout. Obviously, no one wants to see that because especially the last couple of years have been really fun. So we hope for that again. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about ticket prices and some of the ratings down in San Antonio because that is where the Final Four was. And I looked this up myself as well on StubHub and SeatGeek. You could get into the Final Four for as little as $99 to watch the 2 games on Saturday night. And then if you wanted to get the 2 games Saturday night and then tonight's championship game, tickets were as cheap as $300, which sounds that's not cheap, but for 3 of the biggest games in college sports, $300 is not terrible. But then if you want to sit in some of the better seats courtside, you can the prices are kind of starting at around $7,000. So that's a big jump. But yeah, people are clearly willing to pay. And then just to show you how big an event this is. So this is at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio. I think they've hosted the NCAA Final Four a couple times. It seats about 72,000. The San Antonio Spurs used to play there. They don't play there anymore, but 2,600 employees are working the Final Four this weekend, and the event's so big that none of them got to drive and park there because they have to use the parking for fans. So they were bussing in these employees from a stadium like 15 minutes away, which I just thought was kind of a funny story. And then in terms of the Final Four ratings aren't out because that was just Saturday night, but the Sweet 16 ratings, the television ratings on TBS and CBS were down a little bit. For most of the games, you had 2 of the 8 games that were up, but the big problem was that there was a lot of higher seeds. I mean, as much as people like kind of the Cinderella-ish stories or the teams that aren't the blue bloods of college basketball, it seems like the ratings didn't really necessarily favor that, especially since a lot of people's brackets got busted early. So they're like, I'm not going to watch this game that I have no stake in what happens at all. But then the Elite 8 games were up on TBS and CBS. The 4 games averaged around 10.7 million viewers, so that's pretty good, up 5% from the year before. And then the Duke-Kansas game on Sunday afternoon, so this was last Sunday, it was the most watched Elite 8 game since 2005. So that's good for college basketball. And then I kind of want to make an awkward but quick transition into Major League Baseball. Their season started last Thursday. As most listeners probably know, it is an insanely long season. It is 162 games, 30 teams. It was once America's pastime, baseball, but this year is the first year. There's a Gallup poll every year about the most watched Americans' favorite sports to watch. In baseball, for the first time, or was the lowest point they've ever had on the poll. It was at 9% of Americans say baseball is their favorite sport, and that's just above soccer now at 7%. So baseball is declining as the national appeal of it. But what I was doing a lot of research over the weekend is how big baseball still is locally. It still dominates in local markets on TV. We live in Chicago. We know the Cubs dominate local television, and we know that Wrigley is packed every single day of the entire summer, even when the Cubs aren't good. And now that they are good, it's really packed. So it's a big local business, and it's going to be there for as long as anyone's caring about baseball. The television partners are going to be there because it's just too many games to be on TV to pass up just the only thing people are watching on live television, which is sports. And so I want to break down a little bit of just the massive money that's in baseball. So this is the richest teams in all of sports, the value of the franchise across football, soccer, basketball, everything. The Dallas Cowboys, and this is Forbes' list from last year, were valued at $4.2 billion. And then the Yankees were next at $3.7. And then Manchester United was third. So that's the realm that the Yankees are living in. And some of the top teams in baseball is they're the most valuable teams in all of sports across the whole world. And 8 out of the top 50 were Major League Baseball teams. So that's just some perspective of how valuable these teams are and just how much money they can make over these insanely long schedules with these big local TV deals and the ticket sales. And then opening day salaries of 2018, the average Major League Baseball salary was $4.5 million, up a little bit from last year. And you had a record 130 players making at least $10 million this year. And this is just sort of blew my mind, just the simplicity of this stat alone. So teams this offseason spent $1.98 billion on 65 multi-year contracts. I don't know. For some reason, that just seems strange to me. But this was down from the year before when Major League Baseball teams spent a combined almost $3 billion on just 57 deals, just offseason deals. So you have some Major League Baseball players that make a bunch of money. Mike Trout, who actually is one of the best players in baseball, multiple-time MVP, but just no one, like I said, most people probably don't know who Mike Trout is, and he's one of the best players in baseball. So that's also not a good sign for baseball really going forward, because he's the highest paid player in the league, and he is one of the best players in the league, yet he's really not on a national scale. I would say most, even more than casual sports fans, don't know who Mike Trout is. So that's not good. And then in terms of the highest payrolls, it seems pretty obvious who some of these teams would be, but you have the Boston Red Sox. Their payroll this season is $223 million for about a 25-man roster. That can fluctuate a little bit throughout the season, but then the Giants are next, the San Francisco Giants at 203, and then the Cubs are third at 183. And the Yankees, who you'd think would be maybe the highest salaried team in baseball, they're spending about $167 million this year. It's their third lowest payroll since 2003, and that's kind of part of what I'm going to talk about a little bit, is maybe some of the money had gotten too big in baseball, and some of these teams are trying to pare it down a little bit. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, and that's kind of also what's crazy about this, is that you have teams on the bottom end. You have the Oakland Athletics and the Chicago White Sox. Their payrolls this year are $70 million. So the gap in between the teams that are spending the most and the teams that are spending the least is really crazy. So the league average is 137, but the top, like I said, is 223. And then you have, the problem here is you have a lot of these teams, say, like the Oakland Athletics or the White Sox, who they get so much money from revenue sharing from the big clubs like the Yankees and the Dodgers that they don't really have any incentive to necessarily get any better, because I don't know this 100%, but I think most of the teams get around like $50 million a year in revenue sharing from the smaller market teams. So that actually is a problem, and the Major League Baseball Players Association filed a grievance against the Athletics, the Marlins, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the Tampa Bay Rays of failing to spend their revenue sharing money to make the team better. So baseball said there was no relevance to this claim, but that's kind of a big deal, because this offseason you had, most people might have heard this story, Derek Jeter is part of a new ownership group in Miami, and then the first thing they did was get rid of all of their best players. They traded away Giancarlo Stanton, to the Yankees, which is where Derek Jeter had played for forever. So you can see where people would get a little upset about teams that are they're in the major leagues and they're just, we're not going to spend any money. We're not going to even try to be competitive. And that's going to be a problem that Major League Baseball needs to address going forward for sure. But in terms of where this money is coming from, how they're able to pay these players so much money, a lot of it's coming from ticket sales and then television deals. That's pretty much where you're getting all of your money. So 2017 marked the 15th consecutive year Major League Baseball set record gross revenues. They passed $10 billion as a league last year for the first time. And as I was saying before, it continues to crush local television ratings. It's the number one thing on TV in a lot of local markets throughout the whole summer. So that's a really big deal. Nielsen collected data, and they found that of the 29 clubs in the United States, so there's one team in Canada, the Toronto Blue Jays, that 12 of them were the number one rated show on television in prime time in their local market. So that's pretty crazy. And then when you look at just cable, and because a lot of these games are on cable, say on Comcast or Fox Sports local, just 4 teams were not the number one rated show in prime time in the summer, which is crazy. So the only teams that weren't were the A's, the White Sox, the Angels, and the Mets. And in the case of the Angels and the Mets, the only reason they weren't the number one show on television in primetime on cable in the summer was that the Dodgers and the Yankees in their same markets were the number one show. So baseball, for as much as it's no longer America's pastime, it is still a local TV juggernaut. And that is why you have Fox Sports, regional sports networks are doing really well. Comcasts are doing really well. A lot of teams were up year over year. But then, there's obviously fluctuation on how well the team's doing. But in general, even if the ratings are down a little bit, it's still the number one show on TV in that slot. So you have that going for baseball. And then I kind of want to just break down a couple of these deals just to show really what's going on, because I didn't know that much about certainly baseball-specific regional sports network deals. So the first example, pretty much how a lot of them work, and that is the St. Louis Cardinals, they have a deal with Fox Sports Midwest, and it starts this season, 2018 through 2032, and it's for $1 billion for the St. Louis Cardinals. So it's about $50 million a year, and then by the end, it's about $85 million a year. But what's interesting is that the Cardinals then get a 30% equity stake in Fox Sports Midwest, because that's how important having the Cardinals on Fox Sports Midwest is to both. It's just sort of this relationship that works out so well, because no one's watching live television in the summer. Certainly a lot of people aren't watching live television. People are on vacation. People are just doing things. Weather's nice. But baseball is just the king of the summer. So as long as baseball's on in the summer when there's not a lot else going on, baseball's going to dominate these local markets. You have the Rangers signed a 20-year deal with Fox Sports Southwest that's worth a total of $3 billion. You have the Astros and the Dodgers and the Padres all kind of signing these same deals where they get an equity stake in the local Fox channel. You have the Yankees and the Phillies all kind of do the same thing. And then this is one of the big reasons why Disney wants to buy this huge Fox deal, because they're going to get then all of these. I think Fox has 65 regional sports networks. And so Disney then, if the deal ever goes through, would get these hugely successful regional sports networks that not only have Major League Baseball, but they have NBA basketball and college sports. So that is a big reason why Disney wants that. And it's also a big reason why their streaming could be maybe more successful down the road if they had all these local regional sports networks that carrying all these team-based sports or city-based sports. And that brings me to another big thing that Major League Baseball, some money making that they have been able to do a lot recently is, so in 2015, Major League Baseball Advanced Media spun off what is called BAM Tech. And then over the last couple of years, they've now sold a majority stake to Disney I believe the total was for $2.5 billion dollars. And Major League Baseball then still owns a minority stake in the company. And Disney bought it because BAM Tech was running and still runs the streaming platforms for not only Major League Baseball, but HBO, the NHL, the WWE. And Disney bought it because now Disney's rolling out their ESPN Plus streaming platform, which is not as big of a deal as it should be because it's kind of a low rent version of what maybe it will be one day. And then they're also going to try to roll out in 2019 a Disney specific streaming service that would be comparable to, say, Netflix or Amazon Prime or something like that. So it's crazy to think that Major League Baseball's media department does all of this streaming for huge other companies in completely separate worlds. So that's really interesting. And then another streaming service that's now directly involved with Major League Baseball is YouTube TV. So that's Google. Google owns YouTube. YouTube TV now has Major League Baseball Network, so MLB Network, on its streaming service, and it will once again be the presenting sponsor of the World Series. It added 2 more years to a deal. So last year, 2017, they were the presenting sponsor of the World Series, YouTube TV. And so what that means is that in 2018, it'll say the World Series presented by YouTube TV. It's simple as that. It sounds like not that big of a deal, but it's crazy to think that YouTube TV is now pushing so much into we are going to be able to cover live sports. And once that becomes a thing, I really don't know why anyone has cable. So once live sports are now just easily being able to watch in these streaming services like a YouTube TV, cable and regular television is just really even more of a bind long term, because that's a big reason why I know I still have cable and that a lot of people still have it, is to watch live sports. And then just a little side note, at the same time Major League Baseball announced this second YouTube TV deal, the NBA is also going to have the first ever presenting sponsor for the NBA Finals, and that's also going to be YouTube TV. And YouTube TV is sponsoring the newest club in Major League Soccer, which is Los Angeles FC. So they're just YouTube TV plastered over their jersey. So watch out for that. If you're watching any sports in the next couple months or so, you're probably going to see YouTube TV at least somewhere. And then one last thing on Major League Baseball before I jump into a little bit of a Masters preview and rundown is what's another interesting thing that you've seen a lot of college teams or college conferences do is something the Chicago Cubs are considering doing, is once their current local TV deal is up, they're thinking about starting their own network. So you have the Big Ten Network, or you have the Longhorns Network, which is specifically just for Texas University sports, the University of Texas sports. And this was a Chicago Tribune article that one of their executives said the Cubs are 80% inclined to start their own television network. So we'll see what that looks like, but that's just something interesting that you could see more of these teams go to. We're just going to own our content. Then no matter where it's going to be disseminated, we own it. So look for that going forward as well. But now I want to get into what I'm most excited about this weekend and what I know my producer Danny is most excited about, and that is the Masters. I think there is just a buzz more than the past couple of years, and it is certainly something that Jim Nantz, who is CBS lead broadcaster, you hear him on the Final Four, you've heard him on all these tournament games, but he will be at the Masters this week. And he said over the last weekend, he was quoted saying, here, let me pull this up. I've had 33 years at this event. It's always highly anticipated, but this is probably the most anticipated Masters any of us have seen in our lifetimes. So that, I mean, obviously he's not going to say, I'm not looking forward to the Masters. He works at CBS, but I don't think it's hyperbole to say that it's a really big deal, and it's because, as easy as it is to say, it's because Tiger's back. I know that's been talked about for a while, but so last year at the Masters, they had their lowest TV ratings in 13 years. But then at the end of last year, Tiger played in his first event in a while. He looked pretty good after his back fusion surgery. And then at the time, you had The Golf Channel's executive producer, Molly Salmon, she told Reuters at the time that she thinks Woods' presence alone can boost the Golf Channel's ratings by 40%, which is a crazy huge number. But then those numbers are kind of backed up by he's played pretty well so far this season. So when Tiger finished second at the Valspar Championship, it was the PGA's largest television audience in 5 years. That specific event the ratings were up 190%, and it was the highest rated PGA Tour event, not including majors, since Tiger Woods won the Players' Championship in 2013. So Tiger clearly, even if it's not great for the sport long term, he's still the driving force of golf. He brings the fans, he brings the viewers. Either you love him or you hate him, you're tuning in to watch Tiger. He's a living legend, as goofy as that sounds. He is. I mean, he's a living legend. And luckily for the Masters, ESPN and CBS, he's back playing, looks healthy, and Vegas has him as one of the odds-on favorite to win. So you have Tiger, Dustin Johnson, Rory, and Justin Thomas are all 10-1 favorites to win the Masters. Woods was 9-1, but it got bet to where they're all tied at 10-1 favorites, and that could change closer to the event. But the last time I looked, he's up there as one of the top favorites to win the tournament this year. And then a little quick background on Tiger for anyone who wants to have something to talk about at the office, because his story's been a little strange in the sense that it seems like he's been out of the game, or he's been on a decline for a really long time. As most people probably know, something that he was at one point the best golfer in the world. He won his first Masters back in 1997, the youngest player ever to do it at the time, and then over the next decade he won almost every tournament he was in. Obviously, that's not true, but he just dominated golf. The 2008 U.S. Open when he was 32, that was his 14th and last major. So that was crazy to me. His last major was a decade ago, and so he's been stuck on 14 for a long time. He's now 42. He ran into those personal problems in 2009, but still, that didn't really derail his career. He has had the most PGA Tour wins since 2008, even with all these young guys coming up on tour. And he's still chasing Jack Nicklaus, who has 18 major victories, and he won his last one at 46. So Tiger has, at least on that timetable, 4 years to do 4. So maybe he get to that point. But yeah, he won 5 times on tour in 2013. He missed the 2014 Masters with back surgery. Then he played in the 2015 Masters and finished relatively surprisingly well at 17 because his back had just been bothering him. But then after that, he didn't play again until January of 2017. And then last March, right before the Masters, he announced that he would miss the Masters for the 3rd time in 4 years. So they're glad he's back. Golf fans are glad he's back. He's only played 5 times this year on tour, but he made 4 cuts, 2 top 10 finishes where he's looked good, driving the ball really well. So I don't want this to turn into just a Tiger podcast, but that's really good for golf fans, great for CBS, great for the game of golf, great for ESPN. And then I want to close with a little bit of Augusta National and the history and kind of how weird this tournament is in the sense that they don't try to capitalize as much as possible on the money they could be getting. So Augusta National is about 2 hours away from Atlanta. The first time they hosted an event that would later become the Masters was 1934. It was called the Augusta National Invitation Tournament. And unlike all the other majors in golf, the Masters is the Masters. So it's always at the Masters, whereas the 3 other events rotate. So that's why this course is historic, and it's one of the hardest tickets in sports to get, not because it's the most expensive, but it's because one of the only ways to get the tickets is through a lottery system that you do a year in advance. Last year, or maybe it's this year, one of the last 2 years, one of the tickets for like early round, practice rounds are $75, which is really, really cheap considering how much you pay for a lot of sporting events. And then 115 for any of the actual 4 days of competition. And this is what also struck me is I was reading a Golf Digest piece from a couple years ago, and the numbers around the Masters are a little cloudy in terms of the specific amounts, but supposedly the Masters leaves $100 million on the table every year that they could be making in just way more sponsorships, way more TV, just way more of everything, that they are just willing to say, we're just going to keep this a minimalist tournament. It's going to be about fans coming to the event. Nothing more than that. Until 1995, you couldn't even watch the first 2 rounds of the Masters on television at all, which is absolutely crazy. And then this year will be the 63rd straight year that CBS has broadcasted the Masters on a 1-year deal where CBS and Augusta National, neither of them make money from it. It's just like, this is our relationship. It's a prestigious event. This is why people consider CBS a great station, because we have something like the Masters and we do it so well. And then ESPN started doing the first 2 days. So Thursday and Friday, they began doing that in 2008. So ESPN will go all in. They're there the whole week. They do SportsCenter from there. They cover the par 3 tournament. It's a big deal for ESPN. And CBS does it more subtly, but ESPN's going to be all in on it. And then there's one new sponsor this year to add to what was 5 before. So there's 6 official sponsors of the Masters. Delta is the newest partner. You have UPS, Rolex, AT&T, IBM, and Mercedes-Benz. IBM and AT&T their logos are on the Masters website. But besides that, you won't see any of those companies' logos or signage at Augusta National anywhere this week. They're paying $6 million annually to have 0 signage on the property and share a combined 4 minutes an hour of advertising time on CBS or ESPN. So that to me is just crazy, in that 4 minutes shared is worth $6 million a year just to be a part of this historic, prestigious golf event. And then one last thing before you go is what I've found interesting, and this is something Danny's been telling me more about, is that CBS and ESPN won't cover the early rounds of the day. So you can't watch the coverage on any of the 4 days until later in the day. But if you go on the Masters website, they pretty much have all day coverage. It's not going to be obviously of every player, but so starting Thursday, they will have featured groups on masters.com from 9:15 a.m. I believe this is Eastern until 7:30 that night, and they'll just show the player every second of those groupings. They'll show everything there, and then starting today, you can watch on masters.com. You can watch players hitting on the driving range, and then I guess they go to the 16th hole and skip balls across the water as a fun little event. So yeah, Masters is a big deal. That's starting this week. National Championship game on tonight. Major League Baseball back in full swing. And then you have the NHL and NBA playoffs coming up soon enough. But that does it for another episode of Full Court Finance. Until next time, I'm your host, Ben Rains. And remember, if you have any questions, please feel free to shoot us an email over at podcast@zax.com.